we go. Welcome in. Welcome in, Heart Talkers, to another episode of Heart Talk with your host, Laurel Lawrence. In this space, we have both the hard and hope-filled conversations of everyday people and everyday stories. And today, my friends, I'm going to say, before we dive into this conversation, I must give a forewarning that the content and the discussions are of a sensitive nature today. So if you're listening around children, probably not a great idea. Use headphones and just be aware that if anything triggers any of your own trauma or your own experience as you listen, to please reach out to a support professional or a loved one. It is always my intention in these spaces to create a brave space where people can come and share their lived experience, because one thing for certain is the guest you're going to hear today, her story is not so unique. And many other women will share this story and this experience. And I think the importance for me to have my good friend here on today is that this is a message that needs to be shared amongst our children, our teens, and the women that we love, we work with. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome my dear friend, Crystal Greenwood, in here to the Heart Talk podcast. Welcome in, Crystal.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, we're gonna just really dive
Yeah, let's
into it.
dive.
So I didn't really give you much of an introduction. I'm going to leave you introduce you. So let's start where I always start with all guests. And if you can share with the listeners, like, who is Crystal Greenwood?
Yeah, cool. I love this question because I think as I get older, it can change, but I like to say I wear many hats. So, first and foremost, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. I have 7 brothers and sisters. I'm a caregiver to my dad. He had a stroke 6 years ago, so I'm his caregiver. And I am a business owner. So, my husband and I actually own Okami Martial Arts in Saskatoon, and that's my passion. Like, I don't know where I would be without this business.
Yeah, and so many of the conversations that I have here on the Heart Talk podcast really focus on how we turn our pain into purpose. Because one thing for certain, none of us are getting out of here without experiencing some pain. And so I also feel like a lot of times when that pain leads us to purpose, we become entrepreneurs, we become business owners, we create spaces where we can educate and help and support people who've gone through similar things maybe that we have. So let's talk about how did you get from there to here, being the founder and owner of Okami and being an instructor of martial arts? Have you always been interested in martial arts, or how did you get here?
Yeah, so I haven't always been interested in martial arts, and I'll kind of share tidbits of my story and kind of how we came to be here. Um, Coming from a big household, we live in a rural community. My home life wasn't always the greatest, so I've always used movement or sport to heal and guide me through my trauma as I was growing. So I remember being in school sports all the time and active, and it just kept me going. That kept my siblings going, and this is where we get a little bit juicy. So when I was 18, I was excited to leave home and go out and explore the world. And I went to go visit a family member in a neighboring province. And I was that girl. I was 18. I was out there having fun. I went to a bar and had some drinks and ended up leaving with somebody. And then, excuse me, um, I remember walking home. I was left on the side of the road after a violent sexual assault. I had no ID. I was in my bra and a jean skirt, and the feeling that I'm feeling right now is
Hmm.
what I felt then. And I remember waking up and I just said, I never want anybody to feel this way again, ever. Like, I couldn't imagine my daughter feeling this way. And at that time, I wasn't involved in martial arts, but I knew I needed movement. I knew I needed movement. So I joined a rugby club. I couldn't think of any way. I was very angry at that point. I couldn't think of any other way but to like go take my anger out on somebody on the field. And that worked good on the rugby field, right? And I'm pretty blessed because that's where I met my husband as well. So through that tragedy, I was able to kind of find my husband and find my purpose with him. And I didn't know martial arts yet at that point. So he actually did. He was semi-pro in rugby and did off-season training. And we then dove into opening a martial arts studio when his closed down. And I didn't know anything about it. And at that point, I didn't know that I needed martial arts yet. I had worked through some traumas. This had been years past, probably 7 years after my assault, that the martial arts studio fell into my lap. And yeah, it was the most healing thing you can imagine, just being able to take back my power, take back the energy, know that if I was to walk out on the street that I was safe and I was okay, and just the movements and I felt confident again was the most amazing thing you could ever imagine. And with that business, that's kind of our mission here at Okami, is that everybody walks through the door here for a reason,
Mhm.
whether it's their own personal tragedy, something going on in their life, something that they've heard, something that they've seen. But my job and my goal is to make everybody feel whole and confident again and ready to tackle whatever they need to tackle.
Oh, my.
Sorry.
No
Whew.
apologies. No apologies. Nothing to be sorry about. I wanted to thank you for being brave and vulnerable. And I can see visibly and hear, and this is the case with all of us when we've experienced something that's so traumatic or violent or emotional or impactful, is that it doesn't matter how many years that's gone by, our bodies hold the story.
Mhm.
And that it's not a matter of just getting over something, it's how we work through it. So let's go back to that a little bit. You're 18 years
Yeah.
old. I mean, I have an 18-year-old, and every
Yeah.
time she goes out, she gets the riot act from me, especially since I've met you and heard some of the stats, the frightening stats about sexual assaults and violence against women. So you're 18, you go out, listen, when we're 18, we just think we're invincible. We're going to
Yeah.
explore the world. We want to just, see and do all the things. Did you have any clue, any intuition, any like signs that night before you decided to, go home with this individual that you might not be safe?
I didn't. So with my home life, I always was looking for love in the wrong places, I like to say. Um, and I didn't. I used alcohol to kind of put a shield up, and I was
Yeah.
invincible, and I didn't. My family member felt something was off,
Hmm.
but me being that 18-year-old, I got a little bit of
Sure.
like invincibility in me. I was like, no, I'm good.
Sure.
And I wish I could have trusted that instinct that he had put out. And
Mhm.
we'll talk a little bit more about trusting instincts. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I just was like, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, because you're a typical teen. I mean, your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. And I say that to my teens. Listen, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that I don't trust you in spaces where there's alcohol or other substances or people involved that then you lose capacity, you lose control, you lose that executive functioning and that gut intuition of like something is off here.
Yes.
And so when that happened, um, I absolutely can't. I mean, I can imagine, but I can't. Like it's like I can visually put even more so thinking about if something like that happened to my daughter. So after that happens and you're standing on the side of the road in just your bra and where do you go from what happened?
I managed to, luckily, we weren't too far out of the small city that I was visiting. I managed to just walk into the closest gas station, and I remembered my family member's phone number, and the attendant helped me call. And my family member took me home, and we kind of just left it there. I didn't go forward and report. I felt
Okay.
so shameful, like, how did this happen to me? Why
Mm-hmm.
did this happen to me? I was just out having fun. Coming from a small town, I wasn't like, I didn't see that kind of stuff or hear that kind of stuff. So I was just very shameful at that point.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that because I think that is why many kids and teens and women don't come forward, or at least don't come
Yes.
forward right away, is the stigma and the shame, right?
Yeah.
So, in that shame, did you feel like you did something wrong, or did you feel like I should have, why didn't I get out? How come I didn't protect myself? Like, how, talk us through that.
Yeah, so I felt shame in the sense, like, how did I let that happen to me? Me being the oldest sister that I've always taken care of my siblings and looked out for them. Like, how did I miss everything? How did I let that happen to me? And like, why? Why did it happen? Yeah, so I was just all any kind of shame feeling you can imagine, I felt.
Which I'm not an expert and I'm not a counselor, but I mean, I've worked with a number of people who've been through similar situations to know that that is a similar experience of shame and guilt
Mhm.
of people who are victims of assault and sexual assault.
Yeah.
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 And so how did this 18-year-old Crystal at that time then move through life? Like how you don't forget something like that. You don't just let go of something like that. So how did you
No.
cope? How did you cope?
It was hard. So there was a point that I had turned to drugs and alcohol before I started realizing I needed to move my body. I needed
Yeah.
to do something to release this anger and this frustration. And when I was 18, back then, there was still that stigma of going to a therapist, looking crazy, all of that stuff. So I didn't go to therapy. I didn't do any of that stuff. I numbed myself with drugs and alcohol and may have gotten myself into situations again that were not great, um, and realized I needed to do something different. And luckily, my sister's friend was like, "Hey, I have something for you," and it was rugby. And I was like, "Okay, let's let's take some anger out, man.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
heal." Yeah.
So you could start to move some emotion because movement moves emotion. Emotion is just energy in motion. And when we're
Mhm.
not moving our bodies or our minds are stagnant, it all just sits there.
Yeah.
So, when one more thing I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
before I forget is like, so during the attack, were you able to fight back or what happens in that moment? Do you go into freeze? Do you go into, because we have that, freeze, flight or fight mechanism.
Yeah,
Like,
there's, like, the fight, flight, freeze,
hmm.
and now, people talk about, like, the fawn, and I
Yeah.
know there's a different phrase for that. I'd actually went into that fawn, I
Hmm.
complied, and that's part of where my shame came from too. I just let it. I just let that happen, right?
Hmm.
But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, so I just let everything happen, knowing that maybe this would be done eventually and I could then get to safety.
Yeah. Again, which
Yeah.
is such a similar story of so many other women who've been through similar experiences. So you find rugby. So rugby becomes a positive outlet for you.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then you meet your husband,
Yeah.
who is
Yeah.
part of the rugby,
Yeah.
experience. And then he introduces you to martial arts. So
Yeah.
let's go through that. So what do you go to a class or what happened? Because I love the idea of martial arts. I think it's so sexy. I think it's so sexy to think about a woman that could like just take another man down if she needed to. And when
Yeah.
I have to say, when my daughter and I came to your one self-defense class, I have never felt so empowered
Good,
to
good.
just kick some ass than I did
Yeah.
after that day. And what was really cool is to see that although physiologically, if you look at a female and a male body, we are not as strong.
Mhm.
But there are other mechanisms of which we can develop these self-defense techniques where we can keep ourselves safe. So
Yeah.
you're introduced to martial arts. So do you start just, what do you start with?
I actually was introduced, so my husband did kickboxing at that time because that was a great for many sports like rugby, hockey, etc. Martial arts is great, like unilateral training for an athlete. So he was doing that, and he wanted to do kickboxing, but I'm like, I didn't love that at that point. So I dove into karate. It's more calm and like serene, like a traditional martial art. And I actually went and we had an instructor that my husband knew. And I basically almost lived up in Prince Albert for a whole summer training in karate until I felt confident. I'm like, I think I could teach some people this. It was one of those fake it till you make it things.
Hmm.
Um, but I just found this like centering within myself and just this calmness that I really enjoyed. And I wanted to share that with others.
Yeah, and that's what they say about martial arts, right? It's not just about the physicality, but it's about the discipline, the
Mhm.
focus, the
Yeah.
alignment of the mind and the body, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so so then you learn karate, okay? How do you get
Yeah.
from there to owning your own studio?
Well, so after I learned karate, I was like right into like that September, let's open a studio. Let's do it. Because his had closed down and he needed to do something. So he's like, let's try this. So we did 2 days a week for 2 years in a community center here before finally I was like, okay, we can't do this anymore. Like people are wanting to come see us. They like this feeling. Let's do something bigger. And then we moved to we're in a newer space now, but we were in a smaller space prior. Yeah.
Yeah, so Okami Martial Arts is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you're thinking, how can I get on board with this? So let's circle back a little bit to some statistics because I think that was one
Mhm.
of the things I found most
Yeah.
interesting as part of your educational, component to your self-defense classes. So can you share with everyone listening what some of the stats are for violence against women, sexual assaults against women?
Yeah, sure. And I actually went and I printed some things out that are the most current statistics. But this one statistic I'm going to share has not changed in the last decade. And that is scary. So, across their lifetime, 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual assault by an intimate partner or a non intimate partner. So, like a stranger or a non stranger. 1 in 3.
Gosh.
1 in 3.
So like every third woman we see
Mhm. At some point in their
at
life,
some
they're
point.
experiencing some level of violence. And now that does change based on where you live,
Mhm.
right? Let me find that statistic where I read.
Yeah, there's so many outside factors, right, that
Yeah, there's
influence
so many
that.
outside factors. So 37% of the women living in the poorest countries have experienced physical or sexual intimate violence. So I know we can probably think of any news stories or things that we've heard or seen from different cities around the world, countries around the world, that the violence is much different there than it is here. But we still all face violence. Again, that 1 in 3.
Absolutely. And then we live in a province of Saskatchewan, within Indigenous communities and intergenerational trauma and residential school surviving.
Mhm.
I mean, the prevalence of violence against women. I mean, I think we're like the last stat I saw, I think Saskatchewan was number one at the top for, violence against women,
Yeah,
and
we are out of all the provinces in Canada, we are at the top. We're like double the nation's standard. And that is because we are so rural, right? So if you think of Saskatchewan, it's so big, so rural, so many remote communities. There's so many barriers and when we talk, I talk about women a lot, but there's violence against men as well. But
Mhm.
there's barriers against accessing things that they need, like help, ways to get out, policing, that kind of thing. That will stop people from being safe.
Yeah. But I mean, no woman is safe from this statistic. Like we all at any
No.
point, wherever we are, ever since I took your self-defense class, Crystal, I am so much more aware in public spaces. I always feel like I've had a good spidey sense, and my gift of intuition and that gut feeling has been very, very tuned in. But I am more so now since you sharing
Mhm.
some of your stories and your things. So 1 in 3. All right, and then
1 in 3.
all right. Is there any other stats that you can weigh in on?
So yeah, 1 in 3. I did just pull up some recent, like for those that are local to Saskatoon, some recent crime stats in August, which are quite staggering if I can say that. So just in August in Saskatoon, not an area, just Saskatoon, there were 248 assaults in Saskatoon. There were 18 cases of stalking. There were 38 sexual violations or sexual assaults
In
in
one
one
month,
month. In 1 month in Saskatoon. And we're not talking about any rural areas, anything like that. That's 1 month.
238.
Yes. And that is again, and I want you guys to keep something in mind when we talk about statistics. These are reported statistics. When people are assaulted, many do not report that because of that stigma, because of that feeling of shame.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
always say that
Yeah.
when we're looking at stats, let's just be error on the side of like this isn't the whole picture.
Mhm.
because not everybody discloses, not everybody
Yeah.
feels that they're in that position that they come forth and actually share what happened to them.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do about this? So I'm a mom. I have a daughter going to university. She's going out. She's in new spaces around new people. Let's first talk about teaching our daughters and talking about amongst women that gift of fear. You and I talked about, we both read that
Mhm.
book. I
Yeah,
read that
it's my
book.
fave.
It's called The Gift of Fear. And I don't know how it landed into my hands when it did. I was probably maybe early 20s. And I would highly recommend everybody read that book. But that gift of fear, of that gut intuition. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so, we all have it. It's a thing that is actually, like, there's physical science behind it. It's not some woohoo thing that people
Mhm.
might think it is. It's actual physical science. So when our body senses danger of any sort, we may feel that gut feeling, hair on the back of our necks, goosebumps, right? We tend to, because, and again, we're talking mainly about women right now, but we tend to, as women, ignore that because society has told us that we need to be calm and we're overreacting or something like that, right?
Mhm.
We need to trust that instinct because that instinct means something is going on around us that is dangerous and we need to look up and take a look and be aware.
Absolutely. And I said that to my husband the other day. We were having a conversation because my kids were in the presence of an individual who, at my first gut feeling when I was around this individual, I couldn't put my finger on it. I just couldn't. I couldn't even explain rationally or logically why I
Mhm.
didn't feel comfortable with them being around this
Yeah.
particular individual. And we had an interesting conversation because my husband and I both felt different things. He didn't feel the same sense that I did. And I go back to a time in my life, many, many years ago, where I had that similar experience. Meeting somebody for the first time, just knowing in my gut that there's danger associated with this individual. Long story short, that individual just finished serving a 25-year sentence for first-degree murder.
Wow. That's crazy.
Right? Crazy. And I will never forget the first time I met him. Never. So tuning into this and moving beyond, like you said, these societal norms of just be polite, don't be rude, be accepting and welcoming is the first thing, right? So what kind of conversation should we be having with our daughters, about that?
Yeah. So the one thing with I want to say is making sure you're having those conversations. I know sometimes those conversations can be scary and intimidating for ourselves to have, but we need to keep that open line of communication. Like you and your daughter talk about things all the time. That's how my daughter and I are as well. It's not like that. When I grew up, my mom and I wouldn't talk about anything.
Hmm.
Right? So even just starting that line of communication and knowing that your daughter knowing that she can come to you if something feels off, if something feels wrong, if she has questions and not feeling embarrassed about that. So keeping that conversation open. And I think that's just where it needs to start is keeping the conversation open. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think not just with our daughters, but our sons too. I
Yes.
mean, I always have, with my teens, I just say, if it doesn't feel light, it's not right. So I say
Yeah.
to them, go with that gut feeling in any new relationship, any new space, any new experience, because that, like you said, it is physiologically wiring that we have. All animals have it, all mammals have it. It's that sense
Yeah.
of danger. We just have so many filters and belief systems and stereotypes that like cloud that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I bet you we could have 100 women right now join us in this Zoom room, and each and every one of them could tell you a story of where they went against their intuition, and afterward they would say, "I should have listened to my
Yeah.
first gut instinct."
Yeah.
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 Okay, so you know, people in and around Saskatoon can access your services, your workshops, your self-defense, your martial arts. But for people who are listening from, we have listeners from 20 different countries.
Yeah.
Is there any simple, effective, easy ways to like get out of a dangerous situation safely?
Yeah. So I like to call it the basics. And the basics are actually like so basic, it's silly. It's awareness. You had mentioned it earlier, Laura, like just being aware. So when you're walking someplace, typically, and I'm addressing this in a stranger fashion. So if I was walking on the street and I'm distracted, that is an easy target for an assailant to look at. But if I'm tall, walking tall, confident posture, eye contact wherever I'm going, phones in the pocket, right? We live in a society where we're always on our phones. Put the phone in the pocket, walk tall. That looks less inviting for an assailant, right? Unless I'm slunched over looking at my phone. So
Hmm.
that is a big one, is just being aware and then trusting your gut. These are the top two things I always talk about, is being aware and not distracted, and trusting your gut. If it feels wrong, if you feel that, trust it. It's screw politeness, excuse me, safety over politeness, always first. Those two things will take you very, very far. And it's teaching our kids that too,
Yeah.
right? Because again, kids, I think, get that same stigma as women when we're coming up through society, and it's just like, don't be loud, don't make a ruffle, don't be rude. But they need to learn how to trust that from an early age, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere too, I don't know where I read this, that we shouldn't force our children to hug people or get
Mhm.
close to people if they don't feel comfortable with it,
Yeah.
because they have that little spidey sense too, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, are there particular spaces in public that are identified as places or spaces where assailants could easily target you?
I think of parking garages right away. They're covered, they're closed, they're big, but they're dark, right? There's
Hmm.
lots of shadows. I don't love to park underground. I like to park up above in the daylight. It might be a longer walk, but it allows me to be safer. Stairwells, elevators, right? So
Hmm.
just some tips I have for myself is I don't let anybody hold the door open for me. I just don't like somebody being behind my back. I won't share an elevator with someone. And again, that may seem rude to some people, but it's my safety,
Yeah.
right? If I need to take the stairs, I look and I listen before I go up the stairs. So there's things that you just need to be, again, that all that awareness comes back into play there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this isn't about instilling fear, I think,
No.
listeners. This is about this awareness that, I mean, of course, you're vigilant, because you've experienced a violent traumatic assault. But had you perhaps, had some of this training, had some of this
Yeah.
education, some of this awareness. I mean, the goal is to prevent the next one, to
Yeah.
prevent the next one.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling us this story about the pregnant woman who went to go and take cash out from an ATM.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So it was a friend of mine many years ago. She was walking, I think it was on a busy street here in Saskatoon, but a little bit later at night. And she went into the ATM, and somebody just came in right behind her, and she didn't think anything of it because somebody going to the ATM.
Hmm.
This person proceeded to hold a knife to her back and rob her.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were in your class, your self-defense class, you were asking, like, if you were in this situation, what would you do? And both my daughter and I were like, we'd kick him in the nuts. And you're
Mhm.
like, no, we don't do that. So let's talk about why we don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's a natural instinct. Sometimes we talked about it earlier, fight, flight, freeze,
Hmm.
fawn. Sometimes that fight nature comes out. That comes out in me all the
Hmm.
time. But I have to control that fight. So the reason we don't want to fight somebody, especially in a self-defense situation, is if we think of our attackers, typically they're much larger, stronger than us. If I'm punching somebody bigger, let's use my husband, 6'3", large guy, 280. If I punch him, he's going to want to punch me back. That's just going to
Yeah.
anger him, right? Or what if they're inhibited on with alcohol, drugs, mental health issues? They're not going to feel that, right?
Yeah.
So then you're wasting energy trying to strike back.
Yeah.
So I
I think
always
that
just
was
say negotiate and like calm. Yeah.
I think that was the one of the best takeaways from it because I just thought,
Good.
well, why wouldn't I do that? I mean, that's where it hurts. But I thought that
No.
was such a good thing for me to learn from that. And I'm going to share with all of you listening is that it was so empowering to see Crystal take down her husband, and he wasn't letting you like when you
He
were doing
gets scared whenever we do this. He's like, please don't hurt me. And I'm like, I won't hurt you. It'll be okay.
like when you were doing the demo, it was like 0.3 seconds and he was on the ground. And I was like, Jesus, she's a super woman. Like she's and so I came home and I tried the moves on my husband. He's 6'7". I'm 5'6". Let's just say, when your limbs are not the same, it wasn't as easy. And so I didn't succeed taking him down like the way you did with your husband. But I said to him afterward, well, I might not be able to, but Crystal could.
Just call me up.
Yeah. Crystal could. But I think what was so valuable, and one of the things that you taught us was how to use arm strength and grip and leverage our leverage our weight and try to like get ourselves out of an arm hold or an arm grip. Like there was so many useful things. I can't recommend enough if you're from Saskatoon area listening to this to get to one of these self-defense classes. Now let's talk about you do a lot of work with kids
Yeah.
and a lot of martial arts. So what is the benefit? Because I mean, in all the communities that we live in or live by, there are martial arts programs. So what's
Mhm.
the benefit of getting your child involved in a martial art program?
Lots of different reasons. Confidence. I mean, as an adult, I gained so much confidence. So imagine instilling that in a very small human as they're learning to develop through their years is really, really cool to see. So the confidence, they learn how to self-regulate. I'm
Mm.
super huge about self-regulation here at the dojo, is like we learn how to self-regulate. When things get hard, and this goes for adults too, when things get hard on the mat, we need to figure out a solution to get through that. And that takeaway goes into life too. When things get hard out there, we need to figure a way through that, right?
Oh my gosh, I love that. That might be, as an educator and a parent and a mental health advocate for youth, one of the biggest benefits is the ability to self-regulate.
Hmm.
So to
Yeah.
use to calm the mind, to control the thoughts, the actions that come from the
Yeah.
thoughts. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, so huge. I have a flux of little guys coming into the dojo. They're 3 years old. It's their first class. Maybe they haven't done kindergarten yet. And there's tears and just learning and the moms want to just jump in. I'm like, no, I got this. We're going to learn how to self-regulate together because one day you will not be here. And that's
Hmm.
hard for moms and parents to hear, but let me guide your kids through that. And
Hmm.
sure as heck, everybody's done tears in 2 or 3 minutes, and we're doing martial arts. We're learning how to say stop. We're learning when we don't want to give a hug, those kind of things. And just it teaches kids so many good boundary settings once we get past all the hurdles. So
Yeah, I try to teach my boys, my three younger boys, that because they're always roughhousing and wrestling and, you know, bugging the shit out of one another, is that when someone says stop, it's stop.
yeah,
And I think that too is a very important thing we teach our kids. Stop is stop. No means no.
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So do you work with a lot of teenage boys as well, in that education component too of like, yeah, the stop is stop, the no is no, like because I think we shouldn't not talk about the responsibility and the actions of our young men who are growing into men,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
how, the respect of another woman's body.
Yeah. We don't specifically talk a lot about it, but what is really cool about the classes when we're in here and when we go out to the high schools is there's usually a pairing of a female and a male instructor together. And there's always talking about consent, asking, hey, we're going to do this technique. Are you ready? Can I grab you? That kind of thing. And seeing healthy, good, strong relationships between adult men and women are very, very important because that's going to help guide them through on the right track.
Yeah, I love this. It all comes down to that conversation, talking
Mhm.
about these kinds of topics,
Yeah.
from kids even when they're younger. Like you said, 3 years old, we start talking about this.
Yeah.
So, we before we wrap up, because oh my, it's time just flies on this. You get
I love it.
this might be one of my favorite episodes to date because it's so relevant. It is so important. It's necessary for safety,
Mhm.
and just teaching our kids what it means to respect boundaries and be in their own bubble. And so, is there anything else you want to share with the audience about your experience or something you'd like for them to know if they've ever been through a traumatic, violent sexual assault or even a sexual assault at work? Like, what can you share?
I want to share that one, you're not alone. You're not alone. Sexual violence or any kind of assault can make us feel alone. You're not alone. There's ways to get help. There's ways to grow and pick up those pieces and get where you need to go. You can do it. End of the
Mhm.
day, you can do it. And if there's any advice I can give to parents is just have that conversation with your kids. Make sure they're aware of, and it can be a scary conversation, anything that goes on in life. Sometimes we like to shield them from everything that goes on. Give them the ability to know what's out there in the world. We're not there to scare them, but we're there to give them awareness. So when they see something, they know how to act.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And there are a lot of different support services and programs, even in Saskatoon, the You Are More project that Lynn Stoddard is part of. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you look, there are support programs there. There are women who've been there, been through it. And like you said, we're not meant to do this alone. We're not meant to sit in silence and shame and hold on to that.
Yeah.
So where can they find you online?
You can check out my personal Instagram page. It's Crystal D Greenwood. I like to share everything that goes on in my life and some safety tips. You can follow us at Okami Martial Arts as well on Instagram. Yeah,
So pretty simple to find.
pretty easy, easy peasy.
Pretty easy. And you're so passionate about this. You're so well spoken. I love how confident you are. I love how empowering you are. And this is going to reach, I think, many, many people, and it's going to be of such value. So thank you for joining me today, Crystal.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.